All three of these pulleys were previously on a Case IH harvester meant to spin at high speeds and under great load. The bearings are shot, so they can no longer be used for that application, but they are, however, the perfect thing to use for an Axworthy Ghost system. In mounting these pulleys, all I had to do was make sure that they were spacered out, so I used a bunch of washers and spacers and whatever was necessary. And this one was a little bit easier because my long bolt was the same inner diameter as the bearing. But on these ones I needed to use a small piece of tube or rod in there to make sure that it was all nice and tight and there wasn't any extra movement. But just spacered right out. Spacered out. Same here. Nice spacing, and you got to keep it nice and tight too. You don't want any extra movement whatsoever. The drive pulley was the same idea. It just had a long bolt going up the middle, and I had it all spacered out with bearings and washers and whatever was necessary, just so that it was hard mounted but would spin freely. You can see how the motor apparatus was constructed here. Just a wooden frame to make sure that it was nice and boxed in. Had plenty of box strength. It was structural. My gear ratio worked out perfect except for the small pulley and the slippage issues, but we had that figured out. Originally, like I had said before, I put a dimmer on this thing so that I could speed it up and down, but with the small pulley it just was completely unnecessary, and I had stolen it from the master bedroom, so it was okay that I got to put it back. It was all hard mounted to our haunted house, or our loft as you would call it. Storage, all the storage for all the junk. You can see again how it's just spacered out, spinning nicely on those bearings. All kinds of torque. When first mounting the tensioner arm, I tried to put it in an ideal position relative to the rest of what was going on right here down the middle. And we also had it hard mounted in 2 points at first. So right off the hop, that's a big no-no. You do not want your tensioner arm hard mounted. You want it hard on one end, but you want to allow it to have a little bit of upward and downward axis, because it's going to prevent any other slippage, and it's going to be the moving point or the designed flexing point of your pulley system. So when you mount your tensioner arm, oh, hold on, let's get back to the story here. So the other thing that I had to do was, when we first mounted the tensioner arm, it wasn't in the best position relative to where the pulley was. So all I actually had to do was move where it was hard mounted somewhere here, a couple inches, and then that gave the arm a much better pitch. The pitch was different on the arm, so that helped tension it better, and at the same time, again, allow the extra slippage and whatever needed to be, but in a controlled manner. So when you mount your tensioner arm, depending on your design, you don't really want it to be tensioning, say, kind of straight out like this. You want it to be at more of an angle with an outward pitch. Choosing your pulley size really is just going to depend on the other factors involved, like the speed that you're running and your gear ratioing that you have set up. So in our situation here, the gear ratioing, or the speed and the torque at which our Axworthy Ghost was moving throughout the system, was damn near perfect right off the hop. So again, I got rid of that dimmer switch because it was not necessary. The only issue with running a small pulley on your drive, however, is you need it to grip properly. And if you get into 200 and 300 and 400 foot Axworthy Ghost systems, where you've got more elevation changes and just the dynamics of what you're doing is that much more extreme, you're either going to need a larger pulley on your drive, or you're going to need to try some of those other drive pulleys. So creating more than one drive pulley will definitely help on any slippage issues. But the duct tape on the pulley is also a fairly reliable trick up the sleeve, because once you've got it tensioned to the proper tension, it's pretty much already not slipping at all whatsoever. So just adding a couple little ripped off pieces of duct tape in there maximized the true gripping power, especially raining throughout part of our trials with the Axworthy, and that also was a contributing factor. Now the main line did have spinners on it. The prototype drive line that we tried did not have spinners on it, and although it worked when it worked and helped give the system enough bite, it probably isn't necessary if your tensioner arm and your main drive pulley have enough grip, enough tension and enough grip. Another thing that I should add is the reason that I chose to use go-kart rims on the outside, but these type of belt pulleys on the inside, was that the inside of the garage and where all the drives were was going to be one elevation of its own. It wasn't going to change. It was all straight in and straight out here much. So I didn't need any kind of pulleys that had extra travel for the elevation change. They ended up working perfect actually. They were just mounted right there. But on the elevation change going to the outside, I knew that the pulleys need to split the difference. And a pulley like this, although it may have worked okay, it probably wasn't going to be the best idea, especially with the way that the wind was blowing during the entire duration of our Axworthy system. We had gusts up to nearly 50 kilometers an hour throughout the 3 days of before and after Halloween. So it was actually kind of just by luck that everything worked out so well. But those go-kart rims on the outside, they also took care of any of the differences the wind and the elevation and all the other dynamics had for us. And these ones worked out excellent on the inside. Like any pulley drive system, choosing the correct belt to use also can be very difficult sometimes. We lucked out actually, and that's why I put the dimmer on there. Was just when you change around your gear sizes, or when you change around your belt and chain lengths on something like this, you also change around that gear ratio. So the dimmer switch is going to help you fan it up and down, but ideally you don't need to use one if you have it set up right the first time. So make sure you take that into consideration if you're ever going to build one of these, is that your gear ratioing is really, really important actually. Having less moving parts is better than having more. So if you can just go from 1 to 2 like this and have the correct speed, or at least be within the threshold of the right speed. So again, you add the dimmer and then you can still speed it up and down depending on your application. All in all, my expenses this year for our Axworthy build was really only came down to a fishing line that was about $30 and a bag of spinners that costed about $14 or $15 as well. Everything else was just hoarded junk, because I've been planning on building one of these for nearly a decade now. But this was our year. If we do it again, you know we're going to take it next level. So the plan is that if we ever do build an Axworthy again, we're going to have to take it across the street to the neighbor's house. Now on YouTube I saw a couple of guys down south who did something like this, and pretty much the only things you need to really do in order to get away with something like that is you need to have the proper clearance for your road. There's certain roads that you will not be able to traverse over your road just because of safety precautions. But in a small residential area, as it turns out, a couple of neighbors can run something across the street. The other thing you need to do is not touch any public property, i.e. trees that are too close to the easements and the public property, and also light poles, any kind of city residential infrastructure. Those things are off limits. If you touch them, you're going to have permission from your town or your RM or your state, wherever you're from, and you're better off not dealing with those. I suggest making temporary masts like we did. All you need is some good weight at the bottom, some lumber, some steel, whatever you're into. Rigid is good, but you want the top to bend a little bit because that's also going to help you tension your system. That's another hint that I should have shared earlier, is that although my towers outside were quite rigid, when we tension this system right up, you are going to see a little bit of movement on something like that up top, but it's only going to help it hold true. When you're mounting to something like trees on your property that you don't have to worry about getting in trouble with, you need to decide whether you really want it to be rigid or if you want to add some kind of tensioner to that as well, like springs, bungee straps, whatever. Sometimes you might have the right tree and it's going to tension up just the same as my towers or masts did. But if you've got a tree that's completely rigid and there's no buckle or movement at all, you may want to add some kind of tensioning there as well. But again, it really depends on your system, and it depends on how elaborate you get with your system. So, to cross the street, I decided if we ever do it, that instead of running one motor like this, we'd be better off just running two motors in tandem. And then the way that we would take care of any kind of slippage is that we got into Power Wheels big time this year, me and my kid. And pretty much every Power Wheels has got a slip clutch or a slip gear on one of the tires because of the way it's set up with drive and a neutral tire. So if you're using pedals or if you're just pushing it along, that tire locks up, and some of you know what I'm talking about. On the ones that are go-karts that have pedals and motors, it's a standard item on there to have that slip gear so that if you push it along or if you're using the pedals, the motor end of it doesn't slip. So something as simple as that being mounted on the inside of one of our drive pulleys would easily compensate for the two motors running at different speeds, because they're never going to be perfect and you're never going to line two of them up exactly the same. Something as simple as that would take care of any slippage on a system like that. You'll definitely get into that 200, 300, 400, even 500 feet with one of these systems, all depending. Stay thirsty, my friends.
Ghost in your house, calling your name. My memory lingers. You'll never be the same. I'm the hole in your heart. I'm the stain in your bed. The phantom in your fingers, the voices in your head.